At precisely 0930 hours on October 16, 1946, in the execution chamber of Nuremberg prison, Hermann Wilhelm Göring, once the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany, creator of the Gestapo, Reichsmarschall of the Luftwaffe, and commander of an empire's air forces, lies dead in his cell. But he has not been hanged. 2 hours before his scheduled execution, the man who sentenced thousands to death has cheated the hangman's noose with a cyanide capsule concealed for months in his mouth. This final act of defiance is fitting, for this was a man who, along with a handful of others, wielded absolute power over a nation of 80 million people and set in motion a war that consumed 60 million lives. Yet Göring represents just one piece of a darker puzzle. Behind the single name we remember, Adolf Hitler, stood a constellation of ambitious men, each commanding vast apparatuses of terror, propaganda, industry, and death. These were not mindless followers. They were calculated architects of catastrophe, locked in perpetual rivalry while orchestrating humanity's most mechanized genocide. This is not the story of Hitler alone. This is the story of his inner circle, the men who ran the Third Reich, and it begins not with military conquest, but with political murder. At 0630 hours on June 30th, 1934, a convoy of black Mercedes-Benz automobiles roars through the Bavarian countryside toward Bad Wiessee, a lakeside resort 35 miles south of Munich. Inside the lead vehicle sits Adolf Hitler himself, accompanied by his personal adjutant and 2 men whose futures will be forever intertwined with terror, Heinrich Himmler and Joseph Goebbels. Their destination is the Hanselbauer Hotel, where Ernst Röhm Hitler's oldest political ally, commander of the 3 million-strong Sturmabteilung, SA, and the man who helped bring the Nazis to power, sleeps soundly in room number 7. Within 48 hours, Röhm will be dead, shot by SS officers in Stadelheim prison. At least 85 others will be murdered across Germany in what becomes known as the Night of the Long Knives. But this brutal purge represents far more than the elimination of a potential rival. It marks the moment when Hitler's inner circle crystallizes into its final, terrible form. The SS, commanded by the methodical and ruthlessly efficient Heinrich Himmler, has proven its loyalty through blood. The Wehrmacht has secured its position as Germany's sole military force. And the power dynamics that will define the Third Reich have been set in concrete and corpses. By the end of 1934, Hitler has constructed a governing system unlike any modern state. There is no coherent cabinet structure, no clear chain of command, no systematic decision-making process. Instead, he has created what historians later term working towards the Führer, a deliberately chaotic administration where multiple agencies compete for Hitler's favor, each expanding its authority through increasingly radical interpretations of his vague directives. This is not bureaucratic incompetence. It is policy by design, ensuring that no single subordinate can accumulate enough institutional power to challenge him. At the apex of this pyramid of rivalry stand 7 men, each controlling vast empires within the Reich. Heinrich Himmler commands the SS, which grows from 52,000 members in 1933 to over 1 million by 1945. His organization encompasses not merely elite military units, but the entire security apparatus of the state: the Gestapo secret police, the criminal police, the intelligence service, and eventually the administration of the concentration camp system. Himmler is 34 years old in 1934, a former chicken farmer with a degree in agriculture, fastidious in habit, cold in temperament, and possessed of an apocalyptic racial ideology that will make him the chief architect of the Holocaust. Hermann Göring, by contrast, is Hitler's oldest confidant among the leadership. A World War I fighter ace credited with 22 aerial victories and commander of the legendary Richthofen Squadron. Charismatic where Himmler is colorless. Flamboyant where the Reichsführer's S is restrained, Göring accumulates titles like a glutton hoarding food. By 1940, he is simultaneously commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, president of the Reichstag, Minister of Aviation, plenipotentiary of the four-year plan, controlling the entire German economy. And in 1940, promoted to Reichsmarschall, a rank created specifically for him and held by no other. He loots art treasures across conquered Europe, maintains a private zoo at his country estate Carenau, and becomes addicted to morphine following a wound sustained during the 1923 Beer Hall Putsch. His initial competence will gradually devolve into catastrophic strategic blunders, but in 1934, he is Hitler's designated successor. Joseph Goebbels controls the mind of the nation. Appointed Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda in March 1933, this 36-year-old with a doctorate in philology from Heidelberg University transforms German media into an instrument of indoctrination with terrifying efficiency. Every newspaper, every radio broadcast, every film, every theatrical performance, all flow through the apparatus he commands. Goebbels is a master of modern mass communication, understanding instinctively what later generations will call narrative control. He is also a fanatical believer in Hitler, keeping detailed diaries from 1923 until his death in 1945 that eventually spanned 29 volumes. Born with a deformed right foot that left him with a permanent limp, Goebbels compensates with a razor intellect, a gift for oratory second only to Hitler's, and a capacity for cruelty matched only by his devotion to the Führer. Two others occupy positions of peculiar influence in these formative years. Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy in the Nazi Party, stands as the ideological keeper of the flame, the man who transcribed much of Mein Kampf when Hitler dictated in Landsberg prison in 1924. Born in Alexandria, Egypt, to German expatriate parents, Hess possesses the zeal of a true believer, but lacks the administrative cunning of his rivals. He occupies the number 3 position in the Nazi hierarchy, but his power is more ceremonial than operational. His bizarre solo flight to Scotland on May 10, 1941, attempting to negotiate peace with Britain, will remove him from the inner circle entirely, discrediting him as mentally unstable and opening space for others to rise. The man who rises into that space is Martin Bormann, and his ascent reveals the dark logic of Nazi governance. Bormann begins as Hess's chief of staff, a bureaucrat widely considered too dull and unimaginative to threaten anyone. But Bormann possesses a quality more valuable than charisma in a dictatorship. He understands that proximity to the dictator trumps formal authority. After Hess's departure, Bormann becomes head of the party chancellery and, crucially, Hitler's personal secretary. He controls Hitler's schedule. He manages Hitler's correspondence. He determines who can see the Führer and who cannot. By 1943, Bormann is arguably the most powerful man in Germany after Hitler himself, not through commanding armies or state agencies, but by controlling access to the one man who matters. Two final figures complete the inner circle, each representing different facets of Nazi ambition. Albert Speer joins Hitler's circle in 1933 as a 28-year-old architect, designing the monumental structures that will embody Nazi ideology in stone and concrete. His vision of neoclassical gigantism perfectly matches Hitler's aesthetic sensibilities, and their relationship deepens into genuine friendship. Speer's true importance emerges later, when he becomes Minister of Armaments and War Production in 1942, rationalizing German industry and extending the war by years through organizational genius. At Nuremberg, he will claim ignorance of the Holocaust a lie that will nevertheless spare him the death sentence. And then there is Reinhard Heydrich, the man other Nazis call the Blonde Beast and the Hangman, Himmler's deputy in the SS-in-Chief. Of the Reich Security Main Office, Heydrich combines Nordic features. He stands 6 feet 3 inches tall with blonde hair and blue eyes, with a mind of crystalline cruelty. A former naval officer dismissed for conduct unbecoming an officer, Heydrich finds his calling in the machinery of terror. He organizes Kristallnacht in 1938. He chairs the Wannsee Conference in January 1942 that coordinates the final solution. He is, more than any other single person save Hitler and Himmler, the operational architect of the Holocaust. His assassination in Prague in June 1942 by Czech resistance fighters is one of the few successful strikes against the Nazi elite during the war. At precisely 1200 hours on January 20, 1942, 15 men gather in a lakeside villa at Wannsee, an affluent suburb southwest of Berlin. The house, requisitioned from a Jewish industrialist, overlooks the frozen Großer Wannsee Lake. The men wear SS uniforms or civilian suits. They are offered cognac and refreshments. The meeting lasts approximately 90 minutes. When it concludes, the administrative framework for the murder of 11 million European Jews has been established. Reinhard Heydrich chairs the conference. The 30 typewritten pages of the protocol, the only surviving copy among 30 originals, employ euphemisms that barely mask their meaning. Evacuation means deportation to death camps. Special treatment means execution. And final solution to the Jewish question means genocide. The document lists Jewish populations by country with bureaucratic precision. France, 700,000. Hungary, 742,800. The Soviet Union, 5 million. Even neutral countries like Ireland, 4,000, and Sweden, 8,000, are enumerated, revealing the scope of Nazi ambitions. The Wannsee Conference does not initiate the Holocaust mass shootings by Einsatzgruppen mobile killing squads have already murdered over 1 million Jews in the Soviet territories by January 1942. Nor does it represent a moment of decision by Hitler's inner circle. The decision has already been made at higher levels through verbal orders and gradual radicalization. What Wannsee accomplishes is coordination. Heydrich ensures that the various government ministries, foreign affairs, justice, interior, the 4-year plan, understand their roles in the machinery of destruction. The civil service of a modern state is being mobilized for industrialized murder. Heydrich's presentation is methodical. Jews will be combed through from west to east and transported to transit ghettos, then sent further to the east. Those capable of work will be used for labor in the course of which action, doubtless, a large portion will fall away through natural reduction. Those who survive will be treated accordingly because they represent a natural selection that could form the germ cell of a new Jewish reconstruction. The language is technical, almost medical. The reality it describes is Treblinka, Sobibor, Belkik, Chelmno, and above all, Auschwitz-Birkenau. The Holocaust reveals the terrible logic of Nazi governance. Multiple agencies compete to demonstrate their efficiency in implementing Hitler's will. Himmler's S operates the death camps. Göring's 4-year plan manages the economic exploitation of Jewish property. Goebbels ensures that public opinion in Germany remains either supportive or at least indifferent through propaganda that dehumanizes victims. Even the Wehrmacht, the regular army, participates extensively, providing logistical support and perpetrating mass killings in occupied territories. The competition extends to technological innovation in murder. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, the camp commandant Rudolf Höschus, a protege of Himmler, implements Zyklon B gas instead of carbon monoxide after discovering it kills faster. He designs crematoria that can process 4,400 bodies per day. Hungarian Jews arriving in summer 1944 can be gassed and burned within 3 hours of disembarking from the trains. This is not the work of irrational sadists. This is bureaucratic efficiency applied to genocide, orchestrated by educated men working within institutional hierarchies. The inner circle's members respond to the Holocaust with varying degrees of direct involvement. Himmler visits concentration camps, witnesses executions, and delivers speeches to SS leaders emphasizing the nobility of their terrible task. Heydrich chairs coordination meetings and inspects killing operations. Göring signs orders for the economic spoliation of Jewish communities. Goebbels crafts the propaganda justifications and, as Gauleiter of Berlin, personally oversees deportations from the capital. Speer claims ignorance unconvincingly, given that his armaments factories employ slave labor from the camps. Bormann facilitates through administrative decisions that eliminate legal protections and property rights. By 1942, the Inner Circle's rivalries have created a German war economy of paradoxical inefficiency. Despite controlling an empire stretching from the Atlantic to the Volga River, despite exploiting resources from Norway to North Africa, Germany produces fewer weapons than Britain until 1943 and is dramatically outproduced by the Soviet Union throughout the war. The reason is systemic. There is no unified command structure for economic mobilization. Göring controls the four-year plan, theoretically responsible for preparing the economy for war. But he is increasingly focused on art collecting and morphine addiction, leaving implementation to subordinates. Fritz Todt, then Speer after Todt's death in 1942, runs armaments production. The Army, Navy, and Luftwaffe each maintain separate procurement systems. Himmler's SS builds its own industrial empire using concentration camp labor. Regional Gauleiters, party officials controlling individual territories, resist central authority and protect local interests. The result is a war machine that, despite vast resources and technical sophistication, performs below its potential because institutional rivalry prevents rational organization. Speer's appointment as armaments minister in February 1942 transforms this chaos. He is 36 years old, a technocrat without ideological passion, focused purely on industrial output. He consolidates production, rationalizes supply chains, protects skilled workers from conscription, and implements three-shift operations in factories. German tank production increases from 2,875 in 1941 to 17,328 in now 1,944. Aircraft production rises from 11,776 to 34,331 in the same period. These numbers represent an organizational revolution, one man finally imposing rational management on a system designed for competition rather than coordination. But Speer's success also extends the war. The additional weapons enable Germany to continue fighting long after rational calculation suggests surrender is inevitable. This extension of the war beyond any hope of victory results in millions of additional deaths, both military and civilian, and allows the Holocaust to continue into 1945. Speer's efficiency becomes complicit in atrocity, regardless of his later claims of moral ignorance. The Inner Circle's true battlefield is not the Eastern Front or the Atlantic Wall. It is the waiting rooms outside Hitler's study, the dinner tables at the Berghof, the conference rooms where policy is determined by whoever can present ideas in terms Hitler finds congenial. This competition intensifies as the war progresses and Hitler becomes increasingly isolated. Bormann excels at this game. He controls the flow of information to Hitler, summarizing reports, editing correspondence, determining what reaches the Führer's desk and what does not. He uses this power to sideline rivals. When Himmler attempts to negotiate with Western allies through neutral intermediaries in spring 1945, Bormann ensures Hitler learns of this betrayal. When Göring, based on a 1941 decree designating him as Hitler's successor, sends a telegram on April 23, 1945, asking permission to assume leadership if Hitler is trapped in Berlin, Bormann frames it as a coup attempt. Both men are stripped of their positions in Hitler's final days, partly through Bormann's manipulation. Goebbels plays a different strategy. Where Bormann works through bureaucratic control, Goebbels maintains influence through ideological purity and personal loyalty. He is one of the few Inner Circle members who genuinely believes in National Socialism as a revolutionary philosophy rather than simply as an instrument of power. His diary entries reveal not cynicism, but faith deluded, fanatical, and ultimately genocidal, but genuine. This authenticity resonates with Hitler who sees in Goebbels a mirror of his own commitment. The competition produces policy outcomes ranging from the merely inefficient to the catastrophically destructive. Göring's Luftwaffe receives priority in aircraft production over Donitz's U-boat program in 1941, despite the submarine war against Britain showing greater strategic promise. Himmler's SS obtains weapons and equipment for Waffen-SS divisions that might more effectively go to Wehrmacht units with better training and commanders. Regional party officials hoard resources against orders from Berlin, protecting their local fiefdoms while the front collapses. At 12:42 hours on July 20, 1944, a bomb explodes in the conference room at Hitler's Rastenburg headquarters in East Prussia. The device, contained in a briefcase placed under the conference table by Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg, detonates with sufficient force to kill 4 men and injure many others. Adolf Hitler survives with minor wounds. Within hours, the conspiracy involving hundreds of Wehrmacht officers, government officials, and civilian resistance members collapses. Within weeks, over 4,000 people are arrested. Approximately 200 are executed, many by slow strangulation with piano wire, their deaths filmed on Hitler's orders. The failed assassination attempt has 2 critical effects on the inner circle. First, it confirms Hitler's apocalyptic conviction that Germany's defeat is the result not of military realities, but of betrayal by internal enemies, the same narrative that explains Germany's defeat in World War I. This conviction hardens his resolve to fight to absolute destruction rather than negotiate any settlement. Second, it provides the pretext for the inner circle to eliminate any remaining institutional constraints on their power. The Wehrmacht, the last institution with independent authority, is subordinated completely to Nazi Party control. Himmler is given command of the replacement army. Political commissars are attached to military units to ensure ideological reliability. By autumn 1944, Germany's situation is militarily hopeless. The Red Army occupies Romania, Bulgaria, and most of Poland. British and American forces are advancing through France toward the German border. Allied strategic bombing has devastated German cities, killing 400,000 civilians and displacing millions. German oil production, critical for mechanized warfare, has been reduced by 90% through bombing of synthetic fuel plants. Yet the regime fights on with fanatical determination, sustained by the inner circle's commitment to Hitler personally and their shared culpability in crimes that preclude any acceptable surrender. At 1900 hours on March 19, 1945, Hitler signs the Demolitions on Reich Territory Decree, known as the Nero Decree for its demand that Germany itself be destroyed rather than surrendered intact. The order is explicit. All military transport and communication facilities, industrial establishments, and supply depots, as well as anything else of value within Reich territory, which could in any way be used by the enemy immediately, or within the foreseeable future for the prosecution of the war, will be destroyed. This is not a military strategy. This is an ideological decision by a man who has concluded that the German people have proven unworthy of him, and therefore deserve to perish. Hitler's logic, expressed to Speer when the architect objects to the decree, is explicit. If the war is lost, the people will be lost also. It is not necessary to worry about what the German people will need for elemental survival. On the contrary, it is best for us to destroy even these things. For the nation has proved to be the weaker, and the future belongs solely to the stronger Eastern nation. In any case, only those who are inferior will remain after this struggle, for the good have already been killed. Speer, to his credit, works to sabotage the decree's implementation, using his authority as armaments minister to delay and obstruct destruction orders. But the Nero Decree reveals the inner circle's ultimate character. Faced with certain defeat, they preferred Getermierung, the twilight of the gods, to rational accommodation with reality. This preference for apocalypse is not limited to Hitler. Goebbels embraces it enthusiastically. Bormann implements it bureaucratically. Himmler equivocates, secretly attempting peace negotiations while publicly maintaining loyalty. Only Göring and Speer display any willingness to contemplate a future without Hitler, and both are denounced as traitors for their efforts. On January 16, 1945, Hitler descends into the Fuhrerbunker beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. He will not leave it alive. The bunker complex consists of 2 levels: the upper Vorbunker housing staff and servants, and the lower Vorbunker, where Hitler occupies a suite of 6 rooms, including a bedroom, study, and conference room. The entire complex is protected by 4 meters of reinforced concrete and located 8.5 meters underground. It is equipped with diesel generators, water supplies, ventilation systems, and telephone communications. It is also a tomb. By April, the situation is beyond catastrophic. The Red Army has encircled Berlin. Soviet artillery shells fall on the Reich Chancellery above, shaking dust from the bunker ceiling. German forces in the city consist largely of old men from the Volkssturm militia, Hitler Youth members as young as 14, and scattered Wehrmacht units. The inner circle has fragmented. Göring has retreated to Bavaria. Himmler is attempting surrender negotiations with Count Folke Bernadotte of Sweden. Only Goebbels, Bormann, and a handful of staff remain in the bunker with Hitler. On April 22nd, Hitler suffers a complete psychological collapse during a military briefing, screaming that he has been betrayed by the Wehrmacht, the SS, and everyone else. He announces he will remain in Berlin and shoot himself when the Russians arrive. His secretaries and staff beg him to flee south to the Berchtesgaden area, where loyal forces still hold territory. He refuses. From this moment, Hitler has effectively ceased to govern. The Third Reich has become a ghost state, with armies receiving orders from a man who controls nothing beyond the bunker's walls. Goebbels moves into the bunker with his wife Magda and their 6 children daughters Helga, 12, Hildegard, 11, Helmut, 9, Huldine, 8, Hedwig, 6, and Heidrun, 4. On April 28th, Hitler learns of Himmler's attempts to negotiate surrender. He orders Himmler arrested for treason, an order that cannot be executed because no one can locate the Reichsführer SS. That night, Hitler dictates his personal and political testaments, documents that reveal his mind unchanged to the end. He blames the war on international Jewry. He expresses no remorse for the millions dead. He expels both Göring and Himmler from the Nazi Party. He names Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor, passing over all remaining Inner Circle members. And he marries his longtime mistress Eva Braun in a brief ceremony in the bunker's conference room. At approximately 15:30 hours on April 30th, 1945, the exact time remains uncertain, Hitler shoots himself in the right temple with his 7.65 mm Walther PPK pistol in his bunker study. Eva Braun bites a cyanide capsule. Their bodies are carried up the emergency exit stairs to the Reich Chancellery garden, doused with 180 liters of petrol and set alight in a shell crater. Soviet shells are landing nearby. The cremation is incomplete when the bodies are buried in a second shell crater. This is the end of a dictator who commanded the fate of Europe for 12 years. But the Inner Circle's end is not yet complete. Goebbels, now designated Chancellor in Hitler's will, makes no attempt to govern. On May 1st, he and his wife drug their 6 children with morphine, then administer cyanide capsules to each of them. Afterward, both Joseph and Magda Goebbels walk into the garden and commit suicide, likely with pistol shots to the head, though the exact circumstances remain unclear. Their bodies are found by Soviet troops, only partially burned. Bormann attempts to escape through Berlin's subway tunnels on the night of May 1st to 2nd. According to later testimony, he dies near the Lehrter railway station, either shot while attempting to break through Soviet lines or by his own hand after taking cyanide when escape proves impossible. His body is not found until 1972 during construction work, identified through dental records. To the end, he remains the shadow man, dying in darkness and confusion. Himmler flees north disguised as a common soldier, carrying forged identity papers in the name of Heinrich Himmler. He is captured by British forces on May 23, 1945, at a checkpoint near Bremerverde. During a medical examination, he bites a cyanide capsule hidden in his mouth and dies within minutes. The architect of the SS and the Holocaust dies as a fugitive, his carefully constructed empire of terror dissolved in weeks. Göring surrenders to American forces on May 8, 1945, the day Germany officially capitulates. He expects to be treated as a head of state, believing he can negotiate with the Allies as an equal. Instead, he is indicted at Nuremberg for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. During the trial, Göring demonstrates the intelligence that once made him formidable, mounting an articulate defense and cross-examining witnesses with skill. He is convicted on all counts and sentenced to death by hanging. On October 15, 1946, hours before his execution, he swallows the cyanide capsule that defeated the hangman. Speer alone among the inner circle's major figures avoids execution. At Nuremberg, he admits responsibility for the regime's crimes, a carefully calibrated admission that accepts guilt in the abstract while denying knowledge of specific atrocities. He expresses remorse, unlike Göring's defiance. He claims ignorance of the Holocaust, though evidence shows he attended conferences where deportations were discussed, and his factories used slave labor from concentration camps. His strategy works. Speer is sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, serves his full term at Spandau prison, and is released in 1966. He spends his remaining years writing memoirs that portray him as the good Nazi, an apolitical technocrat seduced by Hitler's charisma. This narrative is largely false, but it allows him a second life as a historical commentator until his death in 1981. On November 20, 1945, the International Military Tribunal opens proceedings in Nuremberg's Palace of Justice. 21 defendants sit in the dock, representing what remains of Hitler's government. Göring occupies the first chair. Rudolf Hess, flown back from British captivity, sits beside him, displaying symptoms of amnesia, real or feigned. The remaining defendants include generals, admirals, administrators, and propagandists, the machinery of the Nazi state made flesh. The trials last 218 days. The prosecution presents over 4,000 documents and calls 33 witnesses. The evidence includes films of concentration camp liberations, documents bearing signatures of men now claiming ignorance, and testimony from survivors of atrocities. The chief American prosecutor, Justice Robert H. Jackson, frames the legal innovation in his opening statement. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored, because it cannot survive their being repeated. 12 defendants receive death sentences. 7 are imprisoned. 3 are acquitted. The process establishes crucial legal precedents. That following orders is not an absolute defense. That waging aggressive war is a crime under international law. That state sovereignty does not protect leaders from prosecution for crimes against humanity, and that genocide is a crime that transcends national jurisdiction. These principles will resonate through decades of subsequent international criminal law, from the Yugoslavia and Rwanda tribunals to the International Criminal Court. The Inner Circle's story compels us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, bureaucracy, and evil. These were not psychopaths or monsters in any clinical sense. Psychological evaluations at Nuremberg found them generally of above-average intelligence, many with advanced education, several with distinguished careers before their service to Nazism. Göring's IQ was measured at 138. Himmler held a university degree and came from a respectable middle-class family. Goebbels earned a doctorate from a prestigious university. Speer was a talented architect. They were capable of normal human relationships. Goebbels adored his children before murdering them. Himmler was described, by those who knew him personally, as polite and considerate. Göring displayed genuine affection for his wife Emmy. How, then, did such men orchestrate and implement the systematic murder of millions? The answer lies not in individual pathology, but in institutional dynamics. The inner circle operated within a system that rewarded radicalization, punished moderation, and channeled ambition into competition over who could most effectively implement Hitler's eliminationist vision. The structure of Nazi governance, deliberately chaotic, lacking clear hierarchies, organized around personal loyalty to Hitler rather than rule of law, meant that advancement came through demonstrating ideological commitment through increasingly extreme actions. The inner circle members were also bound by complicity. By 1942, every major figure had participated in decisions or actions that precluded any acceptable surrender. They could not negotiate peace because they would be held accountable for crimes against humanity. This shared guilt functioned as a binding mechanism, ensuring that the circle held together even as Germany's military situation became hopeless. They would sink together or not at all, and the result was catastrophe. Perhaps the most disturbing legacy of Hitler's inner circle is what it reveals about the relationship between modern state capacity and mass violence. The Holocaust required the cooperation of multiple government ministries, state railways, chemical companies, and civil service departments. It was implemented not through passionate mob violence, though that certainly occurred, but through memoranda, schedules, supply chains, and personnel departments. The WWII conference was a coordination meeting, not a decision point. The machinery of the German state, built over centuries to administer law, collect taxes, and provide public services, was redirected toward genocide through administrative processes. This is the nightmare that haunts the inner circle's story, that the instruments of modernity bureaucracy, technology, industrial organization can be deployed for absolute evil if directed by a leadership committed to such ends and unconstrained by legal, moral, or institutional checks. The lesson is not that bureaucracy itself is evil, but that bureaucratic rationality is amoral. It can optimize any goal, whether delivering mail or delivering people to gas chambers. The Nuremberg trials prosecuted 199 defendants in total across 13 subsequent trials after the main IMT proceeding. Thousands more who participated in the apparatus of Nazi terror were never brought to justice. Some fled to South America, protected by sympathetic dictatorships. Others disappeared into the displaced persons chaos of post-war Europe. Many simply returned to normal lives in West and East Germany, their pasts overlooked in the need to rebuild functional societies. Adolf Eichmann, one of the primary organizers of the Holocaust's logistics, lived under a false name in Argentina until Israeli agents captured him in 1960. He was tried in Jerusalem, convicted, and hanged in 1962, the only execution ever carried out by the State of Israel. The Inner Circle's legacy is thus not merely historical. It shapes contemporary international law, informs debates about state responsibility for atrocities, and provides case studies in how democracies can collapse into dictatorships. The path from the Weimar Republic to the Third Reich was only 14 years. The transformation from a society with legal protections and democratic institutions to one implementing industrialized genocide took less than a generation. This speed is terrifying because it demonstrates fragility, that the barriers protecting human dignity are thinner than we would like to believe. At the Nuremberg trials, Justice Robert Jackson confronted a fundamental problem in prosecuting the Nazi leadership. How do you hold individuals accountable for crimes committed by state machinery? His answer redefined legal philosophy. The state is an abstraction. It cannot be punished or imprisoned. Only human beings can be held accountable for their choices. Hitler's inner circle consisted of men who made choices to join the Nazi Party, to participate in its radicalization, to implement policies they knew would result in mass death, and to continue fighting long after defeat was certain, prolonging the suffering of millions. Their choices were made within a context the economic chaos of the Weimar Republic, the perceived humiliation of the Versailles Treaty, the political violence of the 1920s and early 1930s. But context is not exculpation. Each member of the inner circle had agency. Each made decisions that advanced or retarded the machinery of atrocity. Some, like Speer, claimed they were caught up in events beyond their control, seduced by Hitler's charisma or trapped by circumstances. This narrative is comforting, but false. They were not victims. They were architects. The inner circle story ultimately demonstrates that great evil does not require great villains in the dramatic sense, no cackling masterminds or supernatural malevolence. It requires ordinary ambition operating within extraordinary circumstances, amplified by institutional structures that reward radicalization and punish moral restraint. It requires the willing participation of educated, intelligent, capable people who convince themselves that their actions serve higher purposes: national survival, historical destiny, racial purity. The names carry weight even now, 8 decades after the Reich's collapse. Himmler, Göring, Goebbels, Heinrich, Bormann, Speer. They are not abstractions. They were real men who commanded real organizations that murdered real people on an industrial scale. Their crimes were documented in hundreds of thousands of pages of bureaucratic records, photographed by their own propaganda apparatus, and testified to by survivors and perpetrators alike. The evidence is overwhelming, preserved in archives from Washington to Moscow, from Jerusalem to Berlin. If you found this exploration compelling, please like this video and share it with others who value historical understanding. Leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. History is a global conversation, and every perspective enriches our comprehension. Subscribe to this channel to support the creation of more in-depth documentary content that examines history not through comfortable myths, but through uncomfortable truths. The inner circle is gone, their empire destroyed, their crimes documented for history. But the questions they raise remain urgent. How do societies protect themselves from the rise of totalitarian movements? How do individuals resist institutional pressure to participate in atrocity? What responsibility do we bear for the actions of our governments and organizations? These are not merely historical questions. They are perpetual moral challenges for every generation. Thank you for keeping this difficult history alive. By remembering, documenting, and understanding the machinery of the Third Reich and the men who ran it, we honor those who suffered under its rule and strengthen our resolve that such an apparatus of terror must never be built again.